Thank you so much for everyone coming back through. I know how good the cookies are here, so thank you very much. Oh, was that a whoop? I nearly got a whoop there for the strength of the cookies. Let's do our next fireside. We are talking decarbonisation, nature and corporate responsibility, navigating sustainability in a complex industry. We're joined by Aimie Keeler, Group Head of Climate and Nature at British American Tobacco. Warm welcome for Aimie, please. Well, welcome, Aimie. Thank you for joining us. And one thing I often like to do before a guest joins us here on the stage is have a good rummage around their website and look for expressions I like the sound of. And one I've picked up on the BAT site is working towards a better tomorrow, which is a beautifully easy thing to say. But what does it mean in reality?
Okay, so at its core, a better tomorrow is all about tobacco harm reduction. So it is the business transforming itself from offering traditional cigarettes, so combustible products, to a range of smokeless products. So that's either sort of modern oral nicotine pouches, vapor products, so vapes as sort of more commonly known, heated tobacco products. And the aim is to have 50% of our revenue from these products and 50 million customers of these products by 2035. And the aim is to get existing adult smokers onto these smokeless products because they've got lower harm rates, lower morbidity, lower mortality. So that's sort of what a better tomorrow means, kind of at its core. It's obviously then something a bit more than that. We use it quite a lot around the business. So it's also related to how we interact with governments, how we interact with policymakers, how we interact with health institutions, and also how we approach the design and production of these new products as well. So about exactly my job, making them more sustainable, ensuring that we're not sort of turning what's currently a health issue into a climate problem. With some of these products, quite complicated. So it sort of encapsulates quite a lot of things, but at its core, it's about tobacco harm reduction.
Because it always sounds, ironic when a tobacco manufacturer is talking about, a smokeless future. Do you sort of couple sustainability and the smokeless future there? Talk to me a bit more about that.
Do we couple them? Yes, because if I refer to it as the problem statement. Actually, I'm probably going slightly off the website here because I've only been enrolled for 4 months, so I'm still very much learning a lot about the business. But I refer to it as a bit of a problem statement, which is we want to get adult smokers from traditional combustibles onto smokeless products for very obvious reasons. Unfortunately, that creates a bit of a climate issue because the production of a cigarette is already very, very efficient. It's got a relatively low carbon footprint, and we understand the supply chains. They are not desperately complicated. If you compare that little stick with some tobacco and a bit of paper and filter inside to a vapor product, and in particular the newer vapor products, which have replaceable, removable batteries, they've got various digital aspects to them, they've got Bluetooth, just significantly more complicated. You can imagine the footprint of these things can be anything from sort of, 1 and a bit times to 4 or 5 times, depends on the product and the company. But on the whole, they have a much higher carbon footprint than a cigarette. So if you're going to follow through with tobacco harm reduction, which is absolutely the right thing to do and absolutely what BAT is going to be doing, you also then need to have a very good sustainability strategy to manage the consequences of that when you move to these new products.
Because I'm always looking for transferable knowledge with these discussions. And here, this is a very traditional industry, as you say. How important is it you adapt to the new world quickly, sustainably? Talk to me about that challenge.
I would say vital. Speed is kind of relative. Like I say, we're trying to get 50% of revenue from smokeless products by 2035. Whether or not you think that's sort of fast or slow as a business, it's actually quite an ambitious sort of target from where we are today. It is vital. It is something that we need to adapt to. It's important for others. It's important for our consumers. Like we say, these smokeless products are proven to have lower health consequences, lower mortality, lower morbidity. You'll see in places, Sweden is a very good example, where they have very much embraced smokeless products, and they've seen a resulting reduction in the health impacts overall, and also fewer smokers in total. Just an excellent case study. You've also seen the reverse, where policies have been brought in to prevent people from purchasing either combustibles or these smoked products. And again, you get quite a lot of unintended consequences. You get markets that aren't legal, products that aren't necessarily compliant with the regulation. So it's quite a tricky industry to manage in that sense. So yeah, it is important that we do it, and we do it quickly.
Well, moving on from that, let's look at the greener supply chain and some of the steps you've made to improve biodiversity in your supply chain and make it greener. A huge challenge, particularly as you're moving on, as you say, to more modern, more complicated products. Talk me through that process. What successes have there been? What challenges have there been? Take me through it.
Yeah. So I think people sort of forget British American Tobacco is, at its heart, it's actually a bit of an agriculture company. We grow huge amounts of tobacco. We are one of the very few tobacco companies that directly contract with the vast majority of our farmers. So we have very, very good working relationships with our farmers, and that's been going on for decades and decades. So on the nature side, actually, we're quite advanced. I have to say, it was a pleasant surprise to come into it. I was in a mining company for a decade before I moved to BAT. And so it was quite nice to come in and kind of talk to some of the nature guys, talk to our leaf guys, and be like, actually, do you know what? You kind of got this covered. I can take a bit of a step back on this side. So I would say, so some things we're doing, we very much follow the mitigation hierarchy. So let's kind of start there. So we start with avoid. And avoid for us is deforestation and conversion. So we have already got in place systems and processes that make sure we are not subject to deforestation in our tobacco supply chain, not subject to deforestation in our pulp and paper supply chain either. So we work very closely with all of our suppliers on that space as just sort of the entry-level avoidance piece. You've then got reduce. So we would look at reduce, and we would look at it in terms of fertilizer use, the use of pesticides. And in that space, we're doing some really fascinating work, actually. We have something called GLAD. So it's effectively a laboratory out in Brazil, and they are developing hybrid tobacco seeds. And these tobacco seeds are resistant to various different climates, I suppose. So some of them cope better with drought, some of them cope better with, sudden floods, some of them resistant to certain pesticides, and they are tailored very much to the place in which we intend to grow them. That means that we don't have to use as much fertilizer, we don't have to use pesticides in the same way, we don't have to use as much water. So, really, really kind of detailed scientific experiments here, trying to make sure that the tobacco that we grow uses the resources that we've got as efficiently as possible. And then we're actually, some of the more interesting work that we're doing at the minute is very much focused on the kind of biodiversity side. So regenerative agriculture, we are starting to implement across a lot of our farms. So that's ensuring that you've got kind of the best practices, again, specific to each of the farms that you're looking at. And we are currently doing a pilot with a company called Pivotal, trying to monitor the biodiversity within our actual farm plots. Again, where we've previously been quite, I'll put my hands up, poor. We've been very, very good at implementing a lot of different strategies on the nature side. We've been very bad at actually collecting the data on those strategies. I think that's probably typical of quite a lot of companies. I'm sure many of you have had the same issue in the room. So one of the things we're working on now, focused very much on biodiversity, is how do we collect all of that data? How do we work out what's actually going on the ground, monitor that, create baselines, and then monitor some of the schemes and initiatives that we're doing to make sure that they are having the right impact. And we're not, for example, just planting a monoculture and saying that that's somehow an improvement. We're actually really trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing, and we can demonstrate that.
If I can just stay with that data question, because I'm sure that's something, as you say, everyone wrestles with constantly, getting the good data. How have you gone about, from what you know about improving the quality of that data, particularly when there's lots of different suppliers, lots of different producers in that supply chain? How has the improvement process worked there?
So that's a wonderful guy at my office called John O'Reilly, who is head of procurement. And he has something called the Supplier Enablement Programme. And they are rightfully incredibly proud of this, because you sort of mentioned earlier the change in supply chains. We've suddenly gone from what was a really simple supply chain, easy to understand. Lots of suppliers still, as you'd expect, and particularly with farmers, lots of very small farm holdings, so a couple of acres, but relatively simple. For the new smokeless products, a fantastically complicated supply chain. And what the team has worked really hard to do is they've created a supplier enablement program that encourages data sharing with our suppliers. So we actually have a 94% response rate to CDP, which, I mean, certainly compared to my previous company, is phenomenally good. And we've spent a lot of time working with our largest suppliers, and that's by spend, as it would be, to kind of bring them along on the journey to get them to a point where they're happy to share their data. They've got developed climate transition plans. About 30% of them now actually have science-based targets as well, which again just gives us kind of a level of confidence that what they're saying they're going to do, they are actually going to do. We can then take that data and we use that to develop our own climate transition plan. So that's a wonderful piece of data sharing. We're also then aware that sort of benefits the wider value chain, because once we've done these collaborative initiatives with suppliers, they can then share that data as well with anyone else that they're supplying. So yeah, in the supplier space, I think actually we've done a very, very good job of kind of collating and getting everyone on board that data is key, and you need to be able to share that. I'd also say specifically on the leaf side, so on the tobacco growing, again, lots and lots of farmers, lots of small farm holdings. Quite often the farmers don't actually work on the same plot year on year. They'll sort of rotate around, so they'll lease out a particular plot for 1 year, and then they'll lease another plot in the same area but for the next year. And so the way that we approach that and data is we have field technicians who will go out and they will actually visit these farms year on year, and they will work with the farmers, they will track things. And we are increasingly using technology in that space as well, so GeoAI, to be able to monitor those plots of land, again, for the purposes of kind of data collection. So we have a surprisingly rich vat of data, actually. It's quite nice.
And another point that I'd want to pick up on, another tangent before I go back to what I was actually going to ask.
These are not the questions that he sent me, by the way, before we got
If you give me an interesting answer, it sends me off on a tangent. There is such a sort of a juxtaposition here of the new that you're working on, which is a very complicated supply chain, and the legacy. And you were going through all the nature-based solutions and all the work that's going on. How critical is it you don't take your eye off the ball of the legacy, of the farmers, of where you're coming from, and keep investing on the sustainability and the nature focus there, rather than just going all in? It's like, right, we've got to make sure that these electronic products are working, and not forgetting about that. It's a really convoluted question, I apologise, but how do you get that balance right?
Okay, personally, I'm still working on it from my side. It's I have a terrible personal habit of going, this project sounds fascinating, and spending far too much time on something because I think it's personally really, really interesting. The business itself actually is very, very good at it. So, like I said, the new products don't take us away from the production of tobacco leaf. You still need to extract the nicotine from the leaf, so you've still got to grow it. That side of things is maintained. Potentially smaller, but it is still there. So we haven't taken our focus away from sort of the importance of nature and our relationship with it. Similarly, these products are new. They're actually quite separate teams in terms of the development of the projects, the management of the products. So I don't think it's a case that we've kind of gone, well, we're just going to forget about this over here. From a sort of sustainability perspective, like I mentioned, the combustible supply chain is very mature, and the product itself has been through so many different iterations already. It's quite difficult to see what you could do in that space. That's not to say that we wouldn't continue to, for example, ensure we decarbonize our packaging, remove as much plastic from it as we possibly can do, use new bio-based materials where we can. So we do continue to look at those things, but the big wins for us, the kind of hotspots, will sit within the smokeless categories.
Yeah, that does make sense. Apologies, that was a serious tangent I went off on. Let's talk about collaborations, if we can, and how cross-sector collaborations are changing to form a bit of a united front for you. Talk me through the collaborations, how you work with different organisations. Talk me through it.
Okay, so I'm going to separate this into probably 2 bits, actually. The first is the supplier enablement piece that I mentioned. And like I said, our procurement team are fantastic at building those relationships with suppliers. They run, you know, huge workshops and events to kind of get everyone in the room and talk through exactly what it is that we're trying to do over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So I should say our net zero goal is 2050. And we're also SBTI aligned, so we've got sort of 42% reduction in scope 3 by 2030. So suppliers for us are very important because they will drive that reduction. And I think through the program we've had really, really positive responses. Been a lot of work in that space, and the fact that we've now got, like I said, 30% of suppliers by spend with SBT targets is fantastic. It makes our lives a lot easier. And it's now kind of working more on just managing those relationships and also bringing on some of those much smaller suppliers where it's probably more tricky to get them on that journey. The other piece of collaboration, which I'm very much enjoying, is in the technology space. And there are some phenomenal technologies out there. There's some just really interesting bits of work going on. And I think actually companies are very good at collaborating. Events like this have become a really good way. So when I signed up for the panel here, I probably within 24 hours had half a dozen people approach me on LinkedIn, which was really embarrassing because I hadn't actually changed my LinkedIn profile to my new role. So I had to very quickly go, I'm not on social media, and LinkedIn for me is one of those things I have to actually actively manage. And so I was, quickly, okay, update my job, update this. And, people sort of reach out because there's just this world of fantastic products out there, particularly in the digital and tech space, that can make our lives so much easier. So I mentioned GeoAI earlier. We've been working with a couple of different companies, actually, running pilots where rather than us having to send a field technician out, so historically what we've done, we've had satellite scans everything. It goes, oh, we think there might be a bit of deforestation over there. And we kind of look at it and we go, yeah, right. And then we send someone out, they go and look. Half the time they go, actually, no, it was nothing. Half the time they go, yep, and we, kind of approach it, or it's something else. The new technology that we are piloting just has the most phenomenal success rate when it comes to identifying these areas of deforestation or changes in crop. It can actually look down at the kind of crop level, and it will hopefully be able to look at things like soil health. It'll be able to see if people are rotating crops as we're asking them to do, how much tillage and things that they're doing. So just the most amazing amount of detail, which means that where we're sending out a field technician, we're not kind of a 50% hit rate. We're actually absolutely certain that we're sending them to the right place to address a real issue. And then the rest of the time, they're freed up to do things like training farmers on how to use correct water irrigation techniques. So the kind of stuff that's actually going to save us on emissions. So that's just kind of one example of where, technology's been amazing. Similarly, we're using Microsoft Sustainability Manager at the minute. We're sort of starting to implement some of that to be able to collate our data and make it all work smoothly. So I'd say the collaboration between businesses and technology is really running quite well, and it's incredibly supportive, I found. So.
And that's such a good example, which we could talk about for another half an hour, because I find that absolutely fascinating. I will go to the room for any quick questions, because I still stuff I would want to go through. Any questions from the room immediately? Oh, we do. You were right in my blind spot there. Bear with me. Surprisingly bright, those lights, so you can't actually see the hands you've asked for.
Thank you. Hi there, Aimie. My name's Ian. I'm from SEDEX. I'm delighted that you're one of our customers. My question is actually a couple of things. You mentioned collaborations earlier on there. I actually work with another brand that or organisation that does something very similar to you guys, and they've expressed an interest to actually do collaboration across other organisations that do similar things to them. I'm wondering whether that is something that BAT is interested in on that basis of collaborating. Second question is just around, you mentioned about sort of farmers, biodiversity, looking at from the point of, you said you have a number of farms that contract directly, so therefore you are their single customer. If you're looking to ramp down what you do in leaf versus what you do with non-leaf, what does that mean for those farmers? What are you doing to help them? Because ultimately, if you say, thanks very much, we don't need the nicotine from you anymore because we've kind of ramped it down a little bit, what do they do? And how does that then obviously lead on to the deforestation that you mentioned, or potential lack of biodiversity, because they then go into other things that might not be as good for the environment?
Two fantastic questions. The first one, I'm going to refer you to somebody like James Yamanaka, because I couldn't possibly talk about cross-industry collaboration. It's simply not my role, but I'm happy to help you find the contacts to discuss that. In terms of farmers and how we deal with that, the just transition as a concept is very much at the heart of a lot of what we do. Like I said, I came from a mining company where communities, how you interact with communities, the ecosystems that kind of pop up around a mine site were obviously at the forefront. And the just transition was as well, because if you're coming out of, for example, coal, that has a big impact. Tobacco has very similar problems, slightly smaller scale. So we are very, very cognizant of the impact that we could have by removing ourselves from any place that we are growing tobacco. One of the things that we're doing as part of the regenerative agriculture is ensuring that we have things like crop rotation. So we are supporting farmers in ensuring that they can grow other crops that aren't tobacco. We support them with just general agriculture practices. So whether that's water management, use of fertilizers, these are practices that can be applied to any crops. They're not just sort of tobacco related. So we're helping them to develop those skills. Regenerative agriculture, and this is very much something that we're only just starting to look at, so I'm going to sort of try and talk about it in a hypothetical sense, but one of the other things that we are looking at is where we use regenerative practices, we are finding that we can actually help store carbon in the soil, so carbon sequestration. I don't want to start talking about offsets and insets, but eventually that is something that we are also looking at. So we are trying to think beyond just, okay, you're a farmer, let's just kind of help you grow crops, into what else can we support you in doing that could potentially help you generate an income, and very much a livable income. So it is something we are aware of. Again, I actually can't say at what speed we will come out of tobacco in terms of growing regions. I can't even say that we will do. It's perfectly possible that we will maintain our footprint. But where we do, we have plans in place to make sure that those farmers are taken care of.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for the question. Looking at my time gone, we'll squeeze one final question in.
Hi, I'm Isabel Devon at the Carbon Trust.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this. My question is very simple. You resubmitted your targets to SBTi very recently. Has that been a difficult process? I realize you were probably at Anglo before, but I have a lot of clients that are in a similar situation where they have to do that. I mean, is there any word of advice that you can give to the room or that you can share from your experience?
For target submission? I would say, you don't have to be 100% certain about what you are trying to get to. I actually worked a lot with the Carbon Trust when I was at Anglo, so hence the sudden recognition there. And we worked a lot on Scope 3. It supported us with our calculations. And it's really complicated, and it's really hard. And getting the data as accurate as you'd want it is also really, really difficult. And you'd find the same with target setting. You cannot be certain. I've got a pretty good idea that we can hit all of our targets in 2030. I have to have, because they're aligned to my boss's bonus. So, if we don't hit them, I'm going to be in trouble. At some point, they're aligned to my bonus as well, and I'm like anybody. I wouldn't mind my bonus. So the short-term stuff, I can get myself feeling comfortable. I know I can do that, and that's fine. That's quite easy. For the longer-term targets, there is just always that uncertainty. Sometimes you're kind of looking at your pathway and you're going like, is that technology ever going to happen? Is my business ever going to be able to do that? But I think you kind of just have to take a leap of faith that there are a bunch of people in this room who all want it to happen. There are a bunch of people in a load of different businesses that all want it to happen. So even if you don't necessarily have every single one of the answers, as long as there's not some major barrier, like you'd have to do something illegal as a business to get there, you kind of just have to have faith that you can work through it. You've got 80, 90, whatever it is % of the answer there. And so you can submit those targets, and you can be reasonably certain that over time you will be able to kind of meet them. Does that answer your question? I'm hoping so. Okay.
Okay. Amy, thank you very much indeed. We are going to have to wrap things up there before we move on to our next session, which will be with Cara Williams from Mercer in just a moment. But for now, our thanks to Aimie Keeler from BAT.